Hey guys, welcome back to the course. Okay, we've covered quite a bit on the editing side and post-production side of things, but if you haven't noticed, each lecture is kind of masking the assumption that you yourself, Mr. or Mrs. Numero Uno, will be doing pretty much everything. Now, I know for a lot of you out there, you might not have much of a budget, or hey, you're really just new to this whole video marketing thing to begin with, so maybe you're just dipping your toes in the water and not yet ready to invest and throw down the big bucks yet, and that's perfectly fine. I personally suggest that in a perfect world, yes, you yourself, take the time to try to do as much of this as you can. If you can learn a little bit about cameras, a little bit about effective scripting, and a little bit about editing, well, then you're going to set yourself up to be in a much better position later on when you do go finally find someone to do it for you. As someone who understands the basics, you will find it way easier to communicate what you need and understand what the hell these people say back to you. If someone asked you what type of editing style you wanted, well, if you'd never opened up Premiere or Final Cut Pro, what exactly would you tell them, and would it all probably sound like gibberish? Kind of like when someone asks me to describe what I want in a logo, I have never designed anything in my life, and so my response usually amounts to basically caveman grunts and made up words like clean-ish or webby.
Don't move. Nope. Good. Okay.
Now, if you're someone who has the budget, henceforth referred to as the budge, or has transitioned to a point where you want someone else to do your post-production, well, then you have a decent set of options. In this lecture, and I think the next lecture, we're gonna cover how to break down video editing from a hiring standpoint, and in the next one, we're gonna tackle where to find these people and how to pick the right person. When I first started making online courses, I painstakingly edited literally everything. Now, I edit maybe 2 or 3 lectures a course, and that's it. Try and see if you can actually guess which one in each course is edited by me. I'll give you a clue. It's usually the one with explosions. Okay, so let's talk about contracting and outsourcing. Generally speaking, when I say video editors, we're actually talking about 3 different functions performed by one person. Number 1, it's called timeline editing. Number 2, we have graphics editing. And number 3, we have animations, if you so decide to use them. Timeline editing is essentially what we did in the last lectures. This consists of taking raw footage or rough cuts, removing bad takes, bad angles, and the like, and putting everything in the right sequence with the right transitions. Now, this process might also include some touching up if, say, your lighting was off, or even audio mixing if you decided to, say, use more than one audio source. Mixing is exactly what it sounds like, by the way. They take audio sources and decide which one is best at what time. Now, graphics editing, on the other hand, would be the process of adding things like floating text, screencasts, images, and even clips of videos. Now, they might even do what are called interstitials, which are basically images or screens that interrupt the main flow of the video for a short period of time. When I edit, I put these in actually a lot. I might interrupt a video to put a big blue screen on that says something important, or I might even freeze the screen and play the Jeopardy music if I, for instance, ask the viewer to think about something or go look for something right now. Yes, I totally invented that joke because I'm that clever. Now, the last thing I mentioned was animations. Now, graphics are the basic elements that get added that aren't footage from your camera. Throw an image up, throw a goofy screen up, or throw up a goofy video, whatever. That's easy. Go find something that matches this topic and then use it. Animation, on the other hand, is almost always a custom process by which they take illustrations or images or who knows what, and they add motion to it. This stuff usually looks great, and it usually gives off the feeling that this is a big production with fancy schmancy editors. You are basically Pixar. Most commonly, you'll see this stuff in those little intro bits to a video where you see an animated logo, but you might see it throughout the video. Now, in the editing style of one of my favorite YouTube channels, Crash Course, I think we covered that already, or it's coming up in the future. Well, they constantly use animation of custom illustrations. Now, think of that. Now, those 3 things I just mentioned, timeline editing, graphics editing, and animation, are what is going to determine who you need to hire and how much you need to pay them. Someone who is only capable of doing timeline editing, and there are surprisingly a large amount of them, will generally be on the cheaper end of the spectrum. If they do timeline editing and graphics editing, you're going to get more expensive, and this is the general rule. The more skills they have, and the more they can do for you, well, then the more they're gonna cost. If they can do all 3 of those things, timeline, graphics, and animations, well, then they're going to be pretty pricey. Generally speaking, it's also the case that you'll find editors out there that only do one of these 3. And in fact, in the case of timeline editing and animation, well, this is actually pretty common. In fact, it's actually kind of rare to find someone who can do animation and also focus on the other types of editing. Usually animators specialize in animation, and often they use entirely different softwares like Adobe After Effects, which you cannot really timeline edit in. If that's the case, well, you might have to look for multiple people, but don't really fret, this is actually pretty normal. Sometimes you'll have a timeline editor who then passes the video off to a graphics person, who then passes it off to an animator. Now, the game with outsourcing video is this. You want to get the person that has all the skills you need and nothing more. Now, the analogy I like to think of is like renting a hotel. Yes, a hotel, stay with me here. Now, when you book a hotel, you'll notice that the prices fluctuate all over the place, and sometimes it doesn't really even make that much sense. Why is a Hyatt more expensive than a Holiday Inn, which is more expensive than a Best Western? Well, because the Hyatt has more amenities, and the price shows that. They have a hot tub. You pay for that. They have a pool. You also pay for that. They have a restaurant, and in fact, even if you don't eat there, you do pay for the access to that restaurant. So if you don't plan to eat and swim at your hotel, why are you booking a Hyatt? Book the hotel that only has the things you'll actually use. So next time you think about hiring an editor, just think, I need a Best Western because it's got a bed, a door, and a light bulb, and you'll never be confused because that makes complete sense even out of context. So decide upfront what you need. Do you want animation? No? Then don't hire someone who has the capability of doing animation. Do you need complex graphics editing or just basic text on a screen? If you need the basics, then don't hire the guy who can do the complex stuff. If you know what you want, that'll make the process simpler and cheaper. The second thing you need to decide upfront is this. How much time do you want to spend managing this person? Maybe you're the person who has lots of free time and loves to make documents on what you need and can review every minute of video they possibly could pump out. Okay, well that's good to know, although I think you're probably crazy. Maybe you're more like me and you don't have the time to do that, so you want someone who can get more from less with regards to instruction. That specific type of person, you can be more confident that they know what you want, so you don't really need to micromanage them as much. Now the rule here is very simple. The more communication and management you are willing to give, then the cheaper they will be. There are video editors all over the world. I can hire someone in San Francisco or someone in Mombasa, Kenya. The person in San Francisco is going to be able to run on their own without much from me. They're probably going to be more independent, but the person in Kenya will not just figure it out on their own. Their standard of editing and their standard of what good qualifies as is just different, and you'll have to make up the gap with more direction and more hand-holding. If you guys are in my outsourcing courses, then you know this tenet pretty well. If you want to get the best bang for your buck, then you're just going to have to spend more time on it personally. So ask yourself, how much time do I have to spend on this? Maybe you're making an educational series where you publish 2 videos a week, and oh, you're also the CEO of everything else. Maybe you want someone who's a little hands-off. But maybe, let's say you're making a one-off promo and your product isn't live yet, so you have some time to make sure you get this one right. Now, here are some prices that you can use as a rough guide to what you'll end up paying for those 2 spectrums of editors, capability and then the requirement of management. Please do not quote me on this, as there are 1,000,001 exceptions and markets constantly change. Someone who does timeline editing only and needs a lot of hand-holding will be the cheapest. If you are okay working with someone out of your country, you can get someone as low as $4 an hour. If you want to work with an American or European film student, you could get them as cheap as $10 to $15 an hour. Now, this is someone who speaks your language and probably doesn't need as much handholding. Now in the $10 to $15 range, $10 would probably be someone who gets a lot of instruction, and then the 15% will be people that are more okay on their own. That's usually the range. If you want someone to do your timeline editing and your graphics editing out of country, you could pay as low as $8 an hour to $20 an hour. In an expensive country with less hand-holding, well, you'll expect to pay more in the range of $15 to $30 an hour. Now, if you want someone who could do all 3, timeline editing, graphics, animation, and custom work, I usually see the prices like this. Well, out of the country with more management, also known as they probably don't speak the same language perfectly, you might get them at, probably $20 an hour on the very low end, but it could easily go all the way up to $50 an hour. In an expensive country with less management and all 3 of those skills, well, you'd expect to pay at an absolute minimum $35 an hour. You could easily pay well over $70 an hour. So there are two ways of planning your strategy. One is to pick where you fall in two regards. Decide what level of editing you need. Do you just need a timeline editor, or do you need graphics, and potentially do you need custom animation? The second thing is how much time and management you're willing to give. Lots of free time and patience, or limited free time, and you want more of a free range editor. Now the other way, of course, of doing this is just to decide what your budget is and then just work backwards. If you know you can only spend $30 an hour, for instance, well, that means you could work with an editor that does all three types of editing, but is out of your country and is going to need more communication and instruction. Or you could work with a local, more independent editor that might not have the same polished set of skills. Now that's two ways of doing it. Take a moment and ask yourself where you fall, and then let's move on to the next lecture where we'll talk about where to find these magical editors. See you then.